get started, so give us a minute here. In a few seconds, I want to do introductions at the table and in the audience. We have a few folks who are interested in becoming members, I think, of the CCC, which is terrific. So what we'll do, if it's okay with the group, is let everyone introduce themselves. We can consider them kind of provisional at the table for tonight, and then the general formal process is just a brief letter from that person showing their interest in the CCC and kind of broadly kind of interests or groups that they represent. That goes to EPA, and then we can formalize it next meeting. So is that okay with folks?
I say we just let them on tonight, like we usually do.
That's fine. I think the letter is just a formality, because I think EPA is generally required that. I think that's normal.
Is that okay
Do
with
they need a letter or not?
No, if they are representing a group, we would just like to know that. If they're representing themselves, that's okay too, I guess, but yeah, just so we know, like, is the person representing
I think everyone here is representing.
If that makes sense. Most people represent a group, but I'm flexible.
I think everyone here actually knows, so I think that's the cover for folks here. Okay, great. All right, well, let's just consider it done, then that'll be even easier. Okay, so why don't we go around the table, just name and affiliation. Let's go around the table here, and then we'll do the folks in the audience. Patrick Field, CBI Facilitator.
Rebecca Gilbert, CBI as well.
Dave Bobrisky, Board for Riverwatch Group.
Jeff Cook, downtown Pittsfield.
Valerie Anderson, Housatonic Clean River Coalition.
John Ziegler, Mass DEP.
Rita Anderson, Stop the Dumps and River Ghost.
Sage Radachowski, Stop the Dumps.
Tim Gray, Housatonic River Initiative.
And Fowler, the Housatonic River Commission.
Judy Herkimer, Housatonic Environmental Action League, Cornwall Bridge, Connecticut.
Audrey Cole, Housatonic Environmental Action League.
Barbara Champerini, Citizens for PCB Removal.
Lauren Gatterty, Berkshire Regional Planning Commission.
Dennis Regan, Housatonic Valley Association.
Jane Wynn, Berkshire Environmental Action Team.
Thelma Barzatini, Citizens for PCB Removal.
Tom Potter, Mass DEP with the Trustee Council.
Becky Cushing, Mass Audubon, Berkshire Sanctuaries.
Susan Peterson, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Benno Friedman, Town of Sheffield, Housatonic River Initiative.
Dean Taliaferro, Environmental Protection Agency.
Our cameraman tonight.
Elias Kyerling, CTSB. Andrew Thorne, let's live in the Four Acres.
Logan Malik, I live in Great Barrington. Larry Barnes, Berkshire.
Olivia Domino, Berkshire Environmental Action Team.
Charlie Champerini, Citizens for PCB Removal.
Scott Campbell with Avatar Environmental Contractors, EPA.
Mark Moore, Deal.
All right, I think that's everybody. Great. Glad to have everybody and glad to see new faces at the table. That's terrific. All right, agenda, let me just walk through that.
Tim Conway couldn't make it tonight?
Tim could not make it. He had something come up at the last minute. Jim Murphy is on his way. He had a briefing with that. Just one announcement, if you haven't heard, we do have a new regional administrator who is on board. So Jim had a briefing with her at 3, so he'll be here at 6:30.
Is he going to do another show tonight?
Yeah, who was it?
I
think one minute.
Alexandra, is it Dunn? I can check in there.
She's from ECOS.
She's from ECOS, which is the 50 states environmental kind of conference. Kind of coordinated all in a work group for the 50 states. That's the best way I can describe it.
First, from the TAG grant recipient, we'll hear a quick update. That'll be from Tim. Dean has promised us, everybody hold on if you're willing to add to the agenda, a website tutorial. And the way I'm suggesting to Dean we do this is you ask him to find things, and we watch him do it to see how it goes. So I thought it would be a bit of a test.
That's harsh.
And then we can I thought that would be a fun way to do it if you're willing. We can come back to that. There's some brief updates on Rest of River, which are not much new or different, but we can hear about that. We do want to talk about some monitoring data from last year, which will be good, so that'll be new good information for people to look at in probably some detail. That'll be our primary kind of meat of the night. And then we have some quick updates, any other updates from folks, public comment, and then we'll close. And sometimes as we go through each section, we take time for public comment as well. Any additions or corrections to the agenda? Okay. Where's Tim? Tim, update.
I have several of things I'd like to go over. I'm going to try to make them as quick as I can. The first one is, I was speaking to Judy the other day, and it came to the attention that we hadn't heard anything from the EAB. So Judy made a call for all of us, actually, that sit around the table here, and asked, can you give us any insight into what's going on? And the answer was no. The EAB is still reviewing, I guess. Well, we don't even know if they're still reviewing, but he basically said he could not make any comments on the petitions before the court. So, so that's where we're at. Nothing as of now. We're kind of stuck in limbo with that. I am going to mention the three things that a lot of us are in court for, and I'm going to keep doing this for as long as we're in court, maybe even longer. But one, I want to mention again that the plan that's on the table with the EPA is only addressing approximately 1/3 of the PCBs in the river. If you use General Electric's figure of how many PCBs they predict are in the river. And if you go back to 1994, when HRI had its first public meeting, the Mass DEP at that time was relying on GE data and telling us there was 46,000 pounds in the river, and with interviews with GE engineers, which you can find on links, it's actually up in Mickey Friedman's video on YouTube, you'll find that it was eventually proven because of interviews with the two GE high managers that 1.5 million pounds were in the river, according to their estimations, and that only amounted to 3% lossage at the plant. That figure did not include midnight dumping, anything that went on that anybody that's been at this site for 20 years knows about, a lot of that kind of activity that went on there. So right now, again, 1/3 of the 3/3 that exist in the river, according to GE, is going to be addressed with the cleanup, and our fear is that leaves the river contaminated forever. With that. And I'll just mention the fact that we're going into that with this figure, and if you remember the Hudson, they had a figure for the Hudson River and they were so firm on it, and GE was abide by it, EPA had that figure, and then in the end when they started remediating, they found out there was a lot more in the Hudson than they had predicted. And I will predict now that probably once they start digging in this river, they'll find more than was predicted. We also want to bring up the fact that both GE and Mass Fish and Wildlife and some other entities have pushed for weaker cleanups in the sensitive area. And a lot of us are very concerned about that because there was an ecological risk assessment done around the year 2003 that showed the critters in the river are suffering from the PCBs. And what do? We come up with a plan that weakens the cleanup of sensitive areas. So we're worried about them, and we hope that EPA will aggressively do a better job at cleaning up those sensitive areas. I'm going to mention some people that are here tonight that have been working on the Stop the Dumps movement in Great Barrington. As you all know, that we are faced with the possibility of 3 dumps in Berkshire County, and instead of digging them up and addressing them with treatment, which is what we believe they should do at HRI, and other people believe it should be trucked out of town, they're not really looking at that much anymore. And we even at one point had a conversation with EPA that tells us that maybe they're looking at not using the 2 dumps, one in Great Barrington, one in Lee, and maybe using only the dump in Lenoxdale, so that could be a possibility too. Nevertheless, as we still may be facing dumps in our community, and we shouldn't let our guard down because it's not a good thing. And again, treatment options should be continued to be looked at continually through this site, because this site has been, we've been coming for 25 years now, and let's say in the next 3 years they develop a better technology, we should be ready to address that and see if it could make our cleanup a little better. And I'm going to leave something here, which I would like looked into by EPA, is that when the Pittsfield Economic Development Authority was approved and got working back in the 90s, I was a natural resource damage ex officio trustee. And I came to my mind the other day that there was a provision that when PETA got up and running and there was some money flowing through PETA, that some of that money would go towards NRD money. And I'd like an update on that. I haven't heard anything in 10 years. And I'd like to hear about it. I ended up quitting as a NRD trustee because I didn't like the shenanigans that were going on at the time in the thing. But so where, is there any money? Number one, I guess, is my first question. And if there is some of that money, why hasn't anybody looked at, including the current trustees, whether or not some of that should go towards NRD money?
And Tim, just to understand, was that the idea that if PETA that was up and running and actually was able to generate income, some portion of that money was supposed to go back in NRD? Was that the idea?
Correct. Okay. Correct. And as far as I know, it might be moot. They do have a property there that I think they must have sold off that property to the bank that's there now, the investment firm or something like that. But I don't know whether that generated enough income to give us $15,000 or whatever it may be. So, but I'd like that, it'd be good to have a report on that and find out what's going on with that.
Who pays the salary for the PETA administrator?
I'm not even sure.
And is there a replacement for Corey?
I have heard none yet. Oh, maybe there was somebody that's been mentioned, I think, in the paper, or maybe one article.
Do you know, Dean?
I don't know. I know the last I heard he was transitioning out, but I haven't heard if they're going to combine the position with an existing position in some government, state or local. I guess there's no county government, but city of Pittsfield or some other entity. But I believe they will still have to maintain an official director of PETA because it's a legislature-created entity, so they need to have a director. That director, it's not for me to decide, but may be able to do more than one job.
Can we ask for an accounting, or are they private now?
You can, they're not private. One could ask PETA to attend. They have, I think, been asked in the past.
We can follow since Corey's gone. We'll follow up the numbers.
What I'm talking about too, I believe, was part of the CD originally, so it could be looked at legally too. What actually is, maybe we could revisit what actually is in the CD that pertains to that.
Okay, we can do that.
Related to that is, I don't mean to put Tom on the spot, but does that sound familiar at all to you?
Oh, absolutely it does, yeah. Because I've heard it, we've talked about it before at this meeting.
Could you speak up, please?
Sure. We have talked about this before at the meeting, the money coming from PETA, and it is something that, as we're winding down with our projects, with our round of projects, and I might as well make the announcement now, we're going to have an open house for everyone on March 29th at the Lenox Town Hall, where we're going to be reviewing all the projects that we've already done, and then looking towards round 4, what we're going to do for round 4. So in this review of the projects that we've already done and the monies that we've spent, of course we're looking to see that we've checked all of our boxes off, and the PETA money is certainly one that's outstanding and something that we're beginning to look into very preliminarily with our attorneys. But Tim, you had raised it before, so it definitely has been on our radar. And believe me, I wish there was something here for us as well. So
what we'll do is for the next meeting, we'll know that as an action item and hopefully be able to follow with both EPA and the state regarding that.
Tom, what's the amount in round 4, please?
We're estimating an amount right now about $750,000 to $1 million, but that's going to depend on what we need, the loose ends we have in 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim, anything else before we move on?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Dean has put up just a quick announcement on the new regional administrator for those who there's more to read. Are people willing to kind of do a quick sort of walkthrough of the EPA website and just get a little feel for that here in real time. Is that worth our time do that for 10 minutes? Is that okay?
Sure. Sure.
All right, Dean, ready? Okay, someone ask him to find a document.
The Peakum from 1994.
That's an old one, I'm not sure that would be.
All right, that's okay.
I just thought I'd pull up. You don't have to do that.
Sure.
I just knew it was one you might be stumped by.
Okay, one's hard, but not quite that hard.
I guess before we do that, I just want to give just a little overview of how it's set up, and I'd be more than happy to do it.
Okay.
So up on the top left is what's called the scroll. So this is where we would put newer announcements. So you can see scroll 1 is the informal comment period on the biota consumption plan and the ERE plan. And if we're good, these are direct links that will bring you to the documents. So scroll 2, did we get that one? And sorry, it's scrolling. It scrolls automatically. So 2 was the Woods Pond and Rising Pond dams. So again, you can see the due date for the comments and a link to the documents. So that's where we would put newer stuff, the CCC meeting, and I think we maintain the final permit. On the right is the public meeting and comment button here. If you click that, you see this is the GE, this is the Pittsfield, or the CCC meetings. There's a separate button for Connecticut. So you can see all the past meetings, which will have all the summaries, all the highlights, and the agenda for the most current upcoming. And then the only other thing I'll say for now, 2 other main buttons, the cleanup areas and focus. This is where I usually look, and it's broken up how the site is broken up. The big one is not the big one of them is Rest the River. All the Rest the River documents are there, and I'm sure we can look at that in a little bit. And the right-hand side has other stuff. There is one called All Publicly Available Documents. All documents that are available on the web page. And there's probably 4,000 in there, so it takes a while to load.
And you can sort by all those different.
You can sort by date, title. Document ID won't help you unless you know the document ID. Author and addressee work pretty well, but it's not foolproof.
And no keyword search with that.
Document title.
So if
it doesn't have to be exact. I would, if there are a lot of documents here, so with the wireless, sometimes this one's a little slow, but it does work.
So
that's about all I wanted to show there, and if you had questions how to find stuff, I can.
Could we find the consent decree and its appendices?
That's a great one. The consent decree is really old.
I had a hard time finding appendices.
That's a tough one because it's old and they're all scanned by hand. So the document size gets pretty big. So if I go under site consent decree here on the right, this is a summary of the agreement, which is not what you're looking for. The consent decree and motion to enter. The challenge with this one is they are here. Including all 12 modifications, which if you scroll down, you can see. To find the actual decree, here's part 8 of 11. You kind of have to know what the parts are. But they're there.
And they're in PDF.
They're in PDF and they're scanned, so you see big megabytes.
So if I wanted to find Appendix O, how would I?
I usually keep clicking till
Part
I
11.
hit it. What?
It's part 11.
Part 11.
Good one, John.
Well, but if you didn't know that.
You click. I usually click in the middle. Like I would click 6 and see which one I get.
Okay.
And slowly, if it's, would you say part O? If I get part C, I know it's farther down.
Okay.
Is there a reason that you can't add, like, just without the blue URL stuff, but just like a thing that says part O or whatever in that?
I might be able to do that if they can change that.
Search?
I don't want to make extra work for you, I just thought
No,
it'd be
it's,
easier.
this is one of the harder ones to search, the CD.
Because it was just this past,
That's the,
Do you know roughly when did the documents move from PDF to actual?
Well, when people started being able to convert directly, you know, you say save as PDF, which I think 2003 and 4, they weren't, these were literally standing at the copier, scanning them. And they're harder to search because
right.
you can use, if you have a, what is it? Character recognition, it might work, but it's certainly not as clean as a one that's made that way.
Okay.
So I can look at what we can do for this, because we've had our own questions on that.
Other questions of things that you have about tracking chain?
Yeah. If I wanted to try and find out if there's a document on the new vernal pool remediation project.
Okay, we have to know what part of the site it's in.
I don't even know if it exists.
It doesn't, so that's why I'm gonna have a hard time finding it.
Okay, never mind. Okay, if I wanted to search for anything related to vernal pools.
So that would be hard. You could probably try the all publicly available documents and see if vernal pool was in the title. If it's within an inspection report that covers other stuff, it might not show up in the title. If you wanted to find the one in the floodplain, you go to floodplain properties, reports, and that one happens to be in phase 4. So you would click that, and this shows you the recent floodplain phase 4, which is adjacent to Fred Gardner Park in that part of the river. So you can see there, if you search vernal pool, I'm hoping you would have found this one, because it is in the title.
Corrective measures study.
Okay, there's 2 ways. So we're going to assume that's going to be rest the river. So the key button for a lot of the rest the river is this one right here, rest the river. So there's a little overview of where we're at, and then the other key button is reports. And you said corrective measure study. So there's 2, corrective measure study and public comments, and corrective measure study proposal. So I would click this one, and that's going to have a lot of the public comments along with the document. So these will, and it goes newest document to oldest.
Can you find, I was recently looking for the Mass Department of Public Health survey that was conducted, help me, and we finally met at an elementary school in Pittsfield where they went over it, and a brochure, little study deliverable brochure was created at the end where they felt, what did they come up with, the 1%, the 1 ppm?
Was that an air quality? Was that air?
Are you talking about blood studies?
It was blood.
Air quality?
No, it wasn't air quality.
It was a blood study.
It was a blood study.
Yeah, there was a blood study done.
I don't know.
What if there was a public health study done in relation by
I mean, ideally that would be on Mass DPH's website. I do have the study done by Mass DPH for Allendale School. It's under Allendale School.
And they got it wrong. They got the calculation wrong. Remember when we presented it to David? Oh, David was actually involved.
Yeah, that was the Housatonic River corridor blood study.
Yeah.
Well,
that's different than Allendale, okay.
And what ended up happening is that a lot of people that were tested had blood levels that were dismissed by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and we did outreach to scientists around the country, and they told us that the background level that the Mass Department of Public Health was comparing their data to was wrong. It was absolutely wrong for the year that they were doing the study, and that turned the study around. In fact, I think we have it, if you go to HRI website and you go to what's called the ABC of PCBs, which is a 150-page document in itself, there is a section in there that goes through that, chronically what happened with the Mass Department of Public Health, and that the blood level was wrong, and I think it gives a citation of who, told us that the blood level was wrong. And when you did it with the right math, it showed that people's blood levels along the Housatonic were elevated.
But it used to be on the EPA's site, because I've gotten to it before, a while ago.
So it might be in this large thing that's having trouble loading.
Right, this will take a while to load.
Okay. So I point noted about the public health studies that actually maybe someone else did that Kennedy found. Just because of time, I'm going to move on. Any other quick questions on this?
I just, you guys are new. They've completely revamped the entire website. It used to be negotiable. You used to be able to wade through it and find stuff. Now it's kind of impossible for some of us. Have you ever been on the site?
I have.
Yeah, yeah.
It looks about like it was when I went on it and searched many, many documents.
How long have we transitioned? How long that this new transitional website's been? 2 years?
Probably a year.
2 years.
2 years.
And Dean, this was EPA nationally required.
Right, and we even had to modify that because the other websites are much more Spartan. There's not much on them.
They're much easier to negotiate.
They're easier, but there's not a lot on it. I mean, if you go to the Hudson one, it's the same thing, and then you're on the main page, but then you go off the page and have to find the actual documents.
So if you go on and you ever have any difficulty, I'll give you Dean's direct number to his desk, and where's Scott, and Scott's number, because they know how to get the documents.
All right, thank you, everybody.
The only one other page that I'm going to show you is, this was a question before, where are all the comments on the statement of work documents? So you would look at this, you would think rest of river, reports, top one, statement of work. That's going to have all of the documents that GE submitted, some of the correspondence. There's the two, hopefully that's legible. The two dam documents are there, O&M documents. Comments on the floodplain documents are here. So the documents and the comment letters will be on this subpage.
Even if there's an informal comment, you'll still post the comment.
If it comes in, yeah. We will post it. I have a couple more that I need to post. It takes 2 or 3 days to post. I think we just got some today. That I have to upload.
Okay, great, thank you.
So that's it.
Right.
And any questions, let me know.
Thank you. Clearly the glossary is called Dean, and you call them and we'll help you find it. Do we go to Rest of River now?
I can, yeah.
All right, let's do it.
I think Tim and Judy did the first one, update on the EAB proceedings. That's the same status I have, is no status, no timeline. We probably would have got the same answer.
How did you connect with them?
Oh, I didn't. We just haven't heard anything.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't heard anything. We didn't contact them.
And Dean, just to be clear, the EAB has no statutory or regulatory requirement to respond to a hearing by any set date, so they take as long as they take.
My understanding is there's no statutory deadline.
Being that Mr. Pruitt, the head of the EPA, or at least for now he's the head of the EPA, when he got put into office, he stated, and I think Mr. Trump stated, that all Superfund sites that are above $50 million will be run by him and overseen by him. And we're just wondering if that is what's going on with binding up the EAB board and things, and possibly could lead to the binding up of our river plan eventually. We're very worried about it because of what we see happening. And he's trying to be Attorney General as of yesterday, though, so maybe they'll appoint somebody new, but they probably won't be much better. They seem bent on, it was announced yesterday, by the way, that they say that Mr. Trump is proclaiming that 50% of the EPA will be fired or something by next year. So the outlook is bleak.
All right, moving on from our non-news on the rest of River. Submittals and status for the non-contested items.
Right, so just very briefly, where we're at, there were 5 or 6 documents that were referred to as non-contested that GE has submitted or will be submitting to EPA for review and approval. I can just quickly run through them. The baseline monitoring plan, floodplain sampling plan. We put on hold the field sampling plan and quality assurance plan until we got more of the objectives ironed out. It didn't seem make sense to have a QAP until you knew what you were doing, or at least until you got a lot closer. This one, the institutional control plan, which is the consumption advisories and the use restrictions. I think that comment period, other than the Connecticut consumption advisories plan, is the informal deadline is today. The Connecticut plan was extended to the end of January. The Woods Pond and Rising Pond maintenance plans, they're in. And the last one that GE needs to submit, will be due in May, is called the model reevaluation plan.
The existing model, the old model?
The existing model, yes.
When's the last time it was futzcliff, so to speak?
Probably not since the CMS was done, would be my estimate.
Would have been 2011.
I mean, it's still run, but we were gonna take a look at some of the input parameters.
Some of the, what?
Some of the input parameters, I'm sorry.
Okay.
For instance, how often do you take a look at that? Is that something that you would, let's say the site goes on and we do begin, you know, as you are showing us that you are beginning moving on certain things in the river, the non-contested stuff, but will you be always looking at that model every couple of years to see if it stays up?
I think we're going to see how things play out. We're going to use it maybe as a diagnostic tool to see if what we predicted happens. We're not using it to try and redo the remedy. The remedy, you know, is going to be what it's going to be, but maybe a tool if something looks a little different. Maybe it'll help explain if we're missing something or if it's acting as appropriate, as predicted, excuse me. So just want to briefly go over the review process. So I think we've said this before, there is no formal comment period. However, EPA committed as part of the response to comment, and just in general, we'll accept comments when time permitting and when it's practical. There is no formal response to comments. So we get the comments. The CD, the consent decree, does require, which we would do anyway, that we ensure that the Massachusetts and Connecticut agencies have reasonable opportunity to review and comment. So we will be, reaching out to them as well. And then it's EPA's job to work with those comments, work with the state agencies to respond to GE. But EPA will issue the final response. It can be a straight out approval letter, a conditional approval letter, which may say your report is good, but you need to do these 10 things in addition. Two that we don't use too often is modification or disapproval. It ends up, if you get your conditions in, usually it's the same thing, and a lot of times it'll be a revised draft, or it'll be split this up into 3 documents to make it more manageable. So that is what we're doing with some of the plans that were submitted earlier. Some of them are pretty complicated, like the baseline monitoring plan. We have a lot of stakeholder comments. So we're reviewing the comments and formulating our responses to GE.
I know you have a question.
Yeah, would you mind going back to the statement you made a minute or so ago, which was that even if it's demonstrated that the reality doesn't conform to the predicted state based on the modeling plan, that would not, in fact, alter any of the parameters decided upon for the cleanup. So, speaking theoretically, if one were to find a considerable discrepancy between the modeling plan and the actual results as they played out, irregardless of how far that gap was between prediction and reality, that would in no way trigger any kind of rethinking or review or addendum or addition or fill in the blank on the part of the EPA for restructuring the cleanup plan.
Very good question. 2 items that I can bring up on that. One, like I said, we will look at it maybe as a diagnostic tool. If there's something in the permit, and I'll try and give an example, the permit requires certain bank remediation. And then hopefully the results in the river give you X. If the results give you something different and we look back and we think it was the bank remediation, maybe it wasn't done fully in accordance with the permit. So we could use that still with the remedy in the permit to maybe do some corrective action or some maintenance that may have been missed. With regard to a broader issue, if the remedy just doesn't give if it was all done 100% perfect by the permit and it's not giving results that are protective of public health, I believe, and Tim is not here, it would be something that would go to a different phase, like a reopener phase. It would be a higher bar. EPA couldn't just unilaterally modify the permit to get a whole new remedy. If it's a significant change in the permit, there is provisions to do it, but it would be in a different manner.
So how regularly is that process of examining the results and comparing them to the prediction ongoing? And is there any way a priori of being informed as to what kind of deviation would be sufficient to trigger either of those 2 results that you described?
On the second one, I'm certainly not going to propose or try to come up with a criteria for a reopener. It's pretty well written in the consent decree and the statute. As far as what would we look at to see if it's success, we do have a couple of guidelines, some of which are standards in the permit, the downstream transport performance standard. So if the remedy is showing that it meets that would be a good sign that you wouldn't have to necessarily go back and look at the model. There's fish reduction that we're projecting would happen at a certain rate. So if it's meeting that would be a good sign. Now, if it's 1% above that, I'm certainly not going to give a bright line, nor would I know one. But those are 2 good parameters to look at to see if the response to the remedy is as projected.
Pardon me for asking one more follow-up quickly. But so in spite of the fact that G is looking for release for an indemnification, are they in agreement, or are they, have they fully understand and accept the ability of EPA to come back and reopen should either of those conditions occur at some point in the future?
Well, I'll never speak for GE, so I'm not sure what they're in agreement with, but I know what the consent decree says, and I think it's pretty clear that reopeners are in there. It would be whatever the words in the consent decree say would govern, and I haven't looked at that section in a while, and Tim Conway's not here, but the reopeners do exist. The consent decree is signed by GE.
Okay.
GE.
Oh, so we're working like kind of in a hybridized system now with the permit, with overtones of the consent decree and kind of jumping back and forth between the 2 and bringing them together. So we've never used a reopener for any material reason as it relates to anything that's happening during an action. Reopeners have been used to date for almost purely administrative housekeeping functions. Is that true?
We have not invoked the reopeners for any reason yet. There have been consent decree modifications, which have been consensual or agreed upon with GE, EPA, and I think the states had to weigh in. So you can do a consent decree modification if all parties agree. That's different than a reopener. A reopener would be unilateral on EPA's part.
So you have no other mechanism when a performance standard is not being met to order GE or to request that they do certain things. It has to go to a reopener.
No, we can do our best to force GE to meet the performance standards. That's what's required. We can't change the performance standard and change the remedy. I'll use those sort of interchangeably. We can't unilaterally change performance standards. We can take steps under the consent decree to push GE to take extra actions to meet the performance standard.
Which wouldn't require a reopener necessarily.
Which wouldn't require a reopener. If the performance standard, for example, is, let's see, meet 1 ppm in the backwaters. That's what the performance standard says. If we get fish data and we don't like the fish data, we can't say, oh, now you got to go back and meet 0.0001 in the backwaters. That would be changing the performance standard. That's not allowed. However, if they were not achieving the 1, I'll use that for an example, it's not a perfect one. If they were not achieving the 1 like the performance standard required, we can take action to make them do that. So the big difference is, are they doing what's in the permit? Are they meeting the performance standards in the permit? That's step 1. We can enforce the permit. If at the end of the day they did everything the permit required perfectly or sufficiently, and the environmental results were unacceptable, and I'll just use that word generically, then EPA has the option to do a reopener.
Okay, have you finalized any of the documents that have come for non-contested?
No, we have not.
So they're all still in the works?
They're all still in the works, yes.
All right, and I just want to let everyone know that if they have an opportunity, or they should, go to the website once it's posted and read Mass Audubon's comments. Are they at the table tonight? Their comments are pretty amazing. It's something that many of us have spoken about, these set of comments. It's like, where were they during the consent decree? We could have really used them. But they're here now. Their team and their law firm are writing some pretty darn amazing, substantial, tangible, viable comments. And I really appreciate them, and everybody should read them. Their law firm, I don't know the team that wrote those comments, but their law firm is a true advocacy for them, for their section of river, and for the entire river, and I appreciate those set of comments.
All right, just because of time, we'll move on to monitoring and data, and again, more to follow on the non-contested documents, and hopefully someday EAP's answer. That isn't the end of the dispute resolution process either, but it could be something. All right.
Okay. You guys, we mentioned previously, I'll try and stand up. If you can't hear me, let me know, but I have to run this as well. Can't really see very well. So I think we talked about GE has done some post-remediation sampling in the 1.5 mile reach. The 1.5 mile reach was remediated from roughly the year 2000 to 2006. So there's been what we call 5-year monitoring. Started in 2007. We did that to match up with the 1/2 mile reach. So there was monitoring in 2007, 2012, and 2017. So this is a summary of the work that was done in 2017 compared back to the previous sampling.
Dean?
Sure.
Quick question, because I don't remember all the data, but how deep is the riprap?
I will go in general. What it ended up being essentially was 3 feet of sediment removed and 3 feet of backfill. So the bottom part of the backfill would have been more of sand and gravel, and then between a foot and a half of riprap. But generally I like to go three in, 3 out. Same with the banks in general. So the first thing I was going to talk about is this actual sediment sampling. As Dennis mentioned, the river was backfilled. The top layer was riprap or rock, which does have void spaces in it, but the nature of this river, there's a lot of deposition. There's a lot of material coming in from upstream. I'll call it sand silt, and it deposits on top of the riprap, and you can fairly easily sample it. So what was done, same as was done the previous 2 times, was called transects that go across the river, perpendicular to the flow. 37 transects with 1 left, 1 center, and 1 on the right side. And that's to account for areas that are grading areas and areas that are erosional. So we try to get all 3 sides. The sampling was done from 0 to 6 inches, and then if you can picture 6 inches to the top of the riprap, top of the rock. And there were a couple locations where we just couldn't get any material. And then lastly, EPA did collect 7 split samples with G, so about 10%, maybe a little less.
What lab are you using these days?
EPA used a lab called Test America.
Where are they out of?
They have numerous offices, laboratories, excuse me. I believe these may have gone to the one in Vermont, Burlington, Vermont.
Will you ever, is there ever any anticipation of you resetting up any kind of lab or science work area where your office is, or is that done?
I think we're done with that. Fixed labs can generally do a better job. So yeah, I don't foresee us doing that at the moment. Just going back a little bit, the pre-remediation sample results, and these will come up again, were approximately, you can read it yourself, 11 at the surface and 20 from 0 to 12 inches. So, and it gets more contaminated as you go deeper. So this is a little busy, but we focus on the red is the new data. So again, 2017, the 0 to 6 inch layer. 103 samples were collected. Here's the average and the median. So you can see you can see the numbers. I won't qualify them. 0.15 was the average concentration. The maximum in the top 6 inches was 2.5 ppm. And this just compares it to previous data. Right now, I'll just focus on these 3. The most significant is the 0 to 6. That's where the numbers are. Very similar. From 2007, 2012 and down a little, and then up a little bit back to where it was in 2007. So I kind of view these as all very similar, no major trend.
Was there a goal in mind of what the concentration, maximum concentration would have been?
I think our goal, I would have to look back, would have been like we called it like an action level or a target level to remediate areas greater than 1. We didn't really, there may have been other goals in there, but I kind of use 1 as a rough number for me. I mean, the goal hopefully would be as low as possible.
You don't see a statistical difference between 0.55 and 2.5? I mean, that's basically
not from
5 times
1.9 to 0.55 to 2.5, no, I don't. And that's only 1 sample, the maximum. I don't see, I wouldn't use this to predict what would happen next time, no. I don't see a trend.
I see a trend.
I do too.
I see a trend.
What's the trend?
I mean, it was at a level, then it reduced significantly, and then it came back. Why did it come back?
Out of 103 samples, I have no idea why 1 would be higher. But I would not use that to assume that in 5 years it would be even higher now. I wouldn't view that as a trend.
Can you do the samples they take, are they from the same sample location?
As best as you can do with survey equipment and when you're walking out there with the waders. Yeah.
Greater than 6 inches.
Is the maximum concentration just one sample?
Yes,
So those are the highest hits that you got.
correct. That's what the maximum.
And so in 2017, greater than 6 inches, 4.35. So analysis-wise, do you think that there's percolation up from the bottom
No.
because it's more contaminated under those 6 inches? Or do you think that this is deposition and as a result of Uncommit Brook being the removal action in Uncommit Brook? Or are these are these representations of inadequate source control for hotspots?
I would say neither, based on what I think this is. This is the same two spots that happened in 2012 and 2017. It's down adjacent to Fred Garner Park. It's actually the same transect and same location, left, I think it was left. It's where the sewer siphon goes under the river. So it's a very tricky spot. It was excavated. We obviously couldn't drive, or we did not drive sheet pile through the sewer line. So some of it was done through the wet with pretty controlled conditions. But it is the exact same spot that had the 2.5 and the 4.3, I believe. Or at least these two were the same. The 1.8 and the 4.35 are the exact same sample. And with those median concentrations of 0.08 and 0.09, that means half the samples are below that and half are above that. That's pretty low. So I don't see, if there was a huge source control problem, I would think that your averages would go up. And I don't see that trend.
Do you give, we may want to come back to it. Do you have other slides to show me?
Sure.
Could you graph that differently perhaps? Not tonight, but could you graph that?
You can
to-
graph 3 points, but you're not usually going to get too much of a trend unless all three are going in the same direction. And here you have a dip and then a back up to where you started. So,
What are the parameters for when something becomes statistically significant?
oh, there's whole courses in that.
But, I mean, who decides that? Do you decide that? Or is it built into the performance standards?
It's not in the performance standard. It's I don't want to say subjective because it's objective.
Maybe go back to just to follow up Judy's question. Sorry, go back one. Just ask that. So say you've got, I think you mentioned maybe the action standard was 1 for remediation. So if the average concentration showed up, in 2022 as 1.2, what would that mean?
From 0.15?
Yep.
That would be an increase. Whether it's a trend, you can't really say because you only have one data point that went up. I mean, a trend to me is if you do 10 years in a row and all 10 years it slowly goes down or slowly goes up. That's a trend.
So we've got some more years to go of sampling before.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would put this as it's stable with no change. Essentially no significant change in the data. That's how I look at this data. Anybody can look at it any way they want. That's the way I look at it.
Have you run the analyses on the data, or you're just going by ocular analysis, looking at the numbers?
Ocular.
Let me just go to that question.
I also think these levels are very low, so if there is a trend, I don't
Let me just go around.
think it's
So I've
significant.
got Valerie, Reed, Sage, and then Lance.
So, Dean, the hot spots there that went up, that's at Fred Garner Park?
It's 6 to 17 inches below the top layer of sediment. Yes, it is adjacent to the opposite side of Fred Garner.
Okay,
So
so-
not the park side, the opposite side.
So that's at the end of the 2.5 mile cleanup area, right?
Getting towards the end. It's not
Yes.
down at the confluence, but it's
Right.
halfway between Pomeroy Ave and the confluence.
So we could say that, at the beginning of the 1.5, good job, and then at the end, there's a hot spot that's going into the rest of the river.
I mean, you can look at it that way. I don't look at it that way. I look at the rest of the sediment downstream of that spot, still having very low, very, very low concentration.
So you looked at
There's
places
spots downstream of
after,
that. yeah.
there are.
That's not the last transect.
Oh, it's not, okay.
Reed.
So, in my understanding, there's 31 spots that are sampled from You're
37.
There's 37 transects, 3 samples per transect. I can't do that
Okay, got it.
quickly, but there were 103 locations sampled.
And, I mean, if you were to take each of the locations and make a graph of it and then superimpose it over top of all of the different locations, would we not see an overall visual, I'm a visually minded person myself, overall visual that might indicate any kind of trend? And do you have any such graph?
Again, I don't have a graph. With 3 points, it's hard to get a trend.
To the whole river.
But this would be looking at.
If you're looking longitudinally, you might, I kind of scanned it and I don't see it again. These levels they're all pretty low. I mean, if you got to meet, if I went upstream to downstream, you could graph that. You could average each transect, I guess, and draw a line and see if it showed anything. I didn't do that. That's something I could look at.
Thanks.
What's the number that triggers a reopener then, if those are low?
I think it was discussed, there's no magic number. Based on this data, there's no way I would consider doing anything else.
Or let me come back. Let me just grab the buckets up to save
Okay. Yeah, my first question was, do you have map-wise data, as Reed asked? Is there a map with all the 37 transects and the average?
Yep. Not with the average. There's a map with the 37 transects.
With the data on it?
With the location, and then you have a table.
Okay, thanks. And my other question is, these surface values that are changing, like, the 3 points vary. Do you attribute that to the surface just is changeable because it may depend on the recent rain events and the history of that last few months, what happened? Whereas the deeper data is the more stable data that we can draw trends from.
I wouldn't necessarily draw that conclusion. I don't know. I mean, we do 3 transects across, I think more just for representativeness. Certain sides of the river typically would stay depositional or original, so we didn't want to bias one way or the other.
I meant why it varied through time, not why you did it across.
No, I know what you mean.
Okay.
I don't know. I didn't look at the data fine enough to know if the depth is more stable than the surface.
So I've got Audrey, Dennis, Barbara, and Tim.
Just for clarification, so these data tests were done on 2007, 2012, and 2017. Does that mean the next one will be 2022?
For the sediment, yes.
It's going to be on a 5-year schedule.
That's what we've done, and GE proposes. The original plan had 2007, 12, and 17, and then, as with most things, GE can propose an alternate frequency. They proposed terminating, and we directed them, I think just today, to continue and do the next one in 5 years for sediment.
It seems short-sighted if you want to see a trend. I mean, just every 5 years.
Well, I mean, as I look at this slide, when I see 99 to 98% reduction in sediment, I'm pretty confident that it was a successful action.
Dennis?
Yeah, it was Audrey's question as well, but adding to that, the assumption is GE will pay for the next sample in 5 years from now.
Correct.
They probably will fight to sample after that. Will EPA pick up the sampling?
I certainly can't commit for what's going to happen 10 years from now.
Is that a desire of whoever EPA?
My desire is, the letter right now says they will sample in 5 years. I'll worry about what happens in 10 years, 5 years from now.
So another question too is this will be online for us to review sitting home?
The presentation?
The numbers in particular, yeah.
The presentation will be online, the reports are online.
And the report's online too with more of the details.
With more of the details, but this presentation and hopefully by middle of next week will be online. Great. So yeah, there's a lot of graphs and a lot of tables in this one. So yeah, absolutely.
Barbara? No, good. Tim?
I'm good.
Okay, Judy?
This kind of reminds me of the Great Lakes data in that thank goodness, they're lower than what we started with by a lot. But the Great Lakes has stalled out, and all of that body of research that has been studied now with low-level sampling is that the biota remains contaminated, and I think we're living that in Connecticut with very low levels, yet more and more species continue to bioaccumulate, and their body burdens are becoming so high that they have to go onto the fish consumption advisory. How many new species since we put pike on? Pike?
I couldn't tell you exactly how many species.
It's
I have to
close.
look at, but there's probably about, I don't know, 12, 15, 18 species. I think you'll find most contaminated. It's just that when we ask them to test, and then we have a result until they're tested. So I imagine you'd find it across the spectrum with most species, depending on their feeding habits, if they're, you know.
So the Great Lakes study shows that even in the presence of very low levels, everything stalls out, but the biota remain contaminated. So I don't know what the answer is.
Let me do this. Let me take Tim's question. Dean's got several more slides. What I suggest is let's take Tim's question. Let's get through several slides, and then we'll take questions just so we kind of keep moving. So
Just adding on to what Judy has said too, is that a lot of the scientific evidence for the Earth, okay, is showing that PCBs are accumulating at very low rates all around the world, but they're finding that those low rates synergistically work together with other chemicals, and the chemical soup becomes a real problem, especially in the animal population. We're seeing polar bears having, they do the old dart the polar bear thing and look at their teeth, but they're finding out they have male and female sex organs on some of the polar bears. They find this on the snails in the bottom of Chesapeake Bay, and they find it all around the world in a lot of organisms, where the hormonal function of a PCB and a lot of its other sister chemicals form these chemical soups and are doing really bad for the Earth. So when you start looking at data like this and you say, well, 0.17 isn't so bad, well, it's not good for the Earth. And that's why, at HRI, we've always said there is no good PCB that we can love, because even these low levels of PCBs affect the ecosystem of the world, and humans too, and breast milk in mothers and things like that, and populations of people that have been affected around the world. So it's important to keep that in mind, that this problem is very low-level oriented too. So when we saw levels up by the GE plant that were 400,000 parts per million, we became quite worried. And EPA, and GE, they got a lot of that stuff out up there. But I guarantee if you go up there and dig down, you're going to find a lot of bad stuff. And that's the problem, why the goal should be here for this river, that we get the most we can possibly do with the best science we can do it with, and don't stop. And the plan should really reflect what we need to do beforehand, not like the Hudson, where now we're having a review after they clean the Hudson and saying we didn't do good enough. And now they go back to GE and say, we want you to do better and dig more out of the river. And of course, guess what's happening? GE is balking at that because we gave them a pathway to be able to balk at that. So this cleanup permit, as I said earlier, the first thing today, falls way short of taking out the PCBs to make this river safe, and to make the stuff that goes down the Housatonic River and goes into the ocean ends up in the Arctic by travel. And so it's really important to remember this stuff is bad. And it's bad because of that, because it circulates through the world.
All right, Dean, let's try to get through several slides and
Sure.
I can take questions.
Like I said, this will be posted, so I'll try and go through some of these quickly, but just I'll show you the right-hand side. This is the overall percent reductions. And to me, even at depth, 99.9% reduction I'll take that, that's pretty good. The second component of the sampling was benthic sampling, benthic invertebrate sampling. We've talked about this before, so I'll just try and go through pretty quickly. It's the same thing every 5 years. For benthics, they sample just 3 transects. And you can see them in. There's 2 components to it. One is to sample for species richness and the number of species, or abundance and richness. So that's what this gentleman's doing. So to have control, it's a 1x1 square meter box. You probably literally pick up the rocks and kick everything into the net. So that's one component of it. Like I said, 3 transects were sampled. Also at those 3 transects, separate from sending it to the lab to count the bugs, is grinding them up and doing a PCB analysis of the fish tissue. So 2 distinct operations. Pre-remediation sampling, again, I'll just go to the PCB number, was very high. I used averages later, so I apologize, but between 190 and 490 was a duplicate. The upstream and downstream locations, there really weren't significant, there wasn't enough invertebrates to even collect and run a sample on.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of what you said. Just start from the beginning when you said extremely high.
I would say the tissue PCB concentration in transect 134, the middle transect, was high. So the concentration, you can imagine the tissue of macroinvertebrates, it was a duplicate sample, so there were 2 samples, 2 jars collected of it, and the lab ran them both. One of them was 190 milligrams per kilogram, and the other was 490.
That's a lot higher than it was.
That's the baseline. That was pre-remediation. That's 2000.
Okay,
That's the pre-remediation.
okay.
So we didn't get to the post-remediation yet.
Why do you think such a big discrepancy between the 2 samples?
It's really not that big. They're both high.
Okay.
The nature of collecting different, it's not really a true duplicate with bugs, but it's more of a replicate in the same area.
That slide was difficult to interpret and read quickly.
It's also well known actually that sampling in the same spot, you can go back to the same spot that you sampled 5 days ago and take a sample and you'll get a different reading. It's very hard to replicate a reading once you've done it in one spot. It almost never is the same when you go back because of the way, it's not only that things move around, but it's also because sampling is not quite, it's not perfect.
Right.
And so you see that when it's always frustrated me trying to figure that out, but it's reality that you can find a much higher number 5 days later than you did before, so.
Which one is Elm Street? Give me a marker.
Lyman Street is the most upstream part of the 1.5 miles. It's the start of the 1.5 miles.
Right.
The next bridge is Elm Street.
There's a barber shop.
There's a barber shop and a beauty salon.
Oh, okay.
Put a dam there.
Oh, okay, all right.
So these are just a couple pictures of where we sampled. There was a little beaver lodge or dam. Actually, this is the dam, so we moved a little bit downstream, but these are all recent pictures, by the way. The middle one from Elm Street to Dawes is the steepest gradient, so typically it was more rocky. That's probably why there were more macroinvertebrates pre-remediation. It just typically is a more cobble reach or a rocky reach due to the gradient. You can see we actually put more boulders in, but I think the restoration there looks pretty good personally. And then the last one's downstream, did I get this right? Downstream between Dawes and Pomeroy, it's the residential neighborhood. And again, you can see some trees coming down, whether it's the beaver or not, I don't know. For scale, here's a couple of the samplers. I don't know if you can see them very well here, but that's just the picture. A bear? Okay, so now I mean, I can go as long as you want, or I can go quickly, but yeah, just a couple of the results. I did go with bar charts here. It's just the number of taxa, so I guess this is called the richness. The significant changes were in the upstream and downstream reaches. You can see relatively, it's all relative, the numbers don't really mean a whole lot to me, but they're much higher these 3 years. As I mentioned, even pre-remediation, there was a fair amount of taxa in the middle reach. And again, you can use your own judgment whether you see a trend. I don't see a trend here. I think it's just generally pretty good. It's generally better than it was. Maybe 3 times as much for the blue and at least twice as much for the downstream.
It's something to keep an eye on because the benthics really rebounded in 2007, and you know, I mean, I'm sure you're going to keep an eye on it.
And this is the abundance. Again, similar. There's definitely going to be variation, but when you compare just the first year to the next 3 years, especially for the upstream and downstream reach, you can see, you know, a significant increase. To me, there's no trend again. Sometimes a little higher, a little lower, but I hate to say order of magnitude, but maybe 3 or 4 times higher post-remediation than pre. And these, the pollution tolerant taxa, so more of the, and again, it's pretty much the same picture. They're all better and up and down much better. The second component of the macroinvertebrates was the tissue sampling. So you actually got in the river and used the technical name forceps or tweezers, and put the macroinvertebrates in a jar until you got 10 grams for the sample, and the jar went in the lab and they extracted the PCBs. So this is real similar to the others. Again, the red is the new data and the percent reduction. So Judy, you were talking about the first one, the pre. This was when it was in the hundreds. So the average was 340. And went to 1.6, to 1.1, to 0.47. So again, 99% reduction. We can't do a reduction for the first 2 because there wasn't enough tissue. And here you'll see it went from, you might not see a trend here with the total data, but I'll show another slide in a minute. So this, again, is straight milligrams per kilogram, not corrected for lipid content. But you can see some pretty big reductions.
So if it was lipid corrected, the numbers would be higher, right?
The units will be higher, yeah.
Yeah.
Magnitude will be the same.
Magnitude may change because it's normalized for the fat. So this is just straight tissue concentration. Log scale, I'll point out log scale, so it's, you know, orders of magnitude different. This is 400 down to the 1 range and then down to that half part per million range. So you may not see much of a trend here, but it's definitely lower. When you convert for lipid, the units don't mean much to me because it's just a strange unit, but theoretically it compares, it corrects for how much fat you have in the biota. The higher the fat, you'd expect higher PCBs, so the theory is if you happen to get a fish with higher fat, you don't necessarily want to compare that to one with lower fat. That's sort of an oversimplification, but that's how I understand it. So again, you can see the numbers. Now if you look at these numbers from 2007 to 12 to now, you I see a trend. I see all 3 of these going down when it's lipid normalized. Did I run statistics? No, I just kind of did the ocular, looked at it and said, lipid normalized looks like they're going down. Can't promise what would happen in 5 years, but to me that looks good. So that's pretty much it, and just a summary, I can certainly summarize a lot pretty easily. data looked pretty good, significant reductions, increase in richness and abundance.
99.9% is not too shabby.
Yeah,
I'm pretty good with that.
and it looks good too. Those
And it looks
pictures
good,
are
yeah.
beautiful.
I will say for this, I did agree with GE to not collect more invertebrate samples. I really don't see the need. I think it's pretty steady. It's a downward trend. I don't know what else it would prove. So that was the decision we made.
Okay.
Seriously, you're not going to do more? That's what means, when you look at the sediment samples and it's not clear where it's going, the invertebrates are the ones who give you the better indicator because they're the ones who are living in there and you know it's going down. If for some reason we're wrong and those sediment samples are going to start going back up, the thing that would give you the best indication is the invertebrates that are living there starting to bump up as well. I think
We
they're
can always
critical one.
reinitiate the sampling. Right now, I don't, see the need to do it. If we do the sediment, like you said, and we start seeing some changes, maybe we'll reevaluate that, but
Why would you call them off on the macroinvertebrates?
call them off. I wouldn't say calling them off. They made a proposal. It seemed reasonable, and I agreed with it.
I think that's a big mistake.
Boy, if you're going to start, allowing GE at this stage of the game when we're in monitoring mode to stop collecting macroinvertebrates, I wonder if that seems to be an ominous sign for sampling in the future.
Tim, then no agreed.
Yeah, the numbers seem pretty good. And we've been looking at them for a year now, for a while. Even the numbers before 2017 seem to be pretty good. And I just want to point out that this plan for cleaning this section of river, which was like an oil field, 15 years ago, especially up near the first sample up. And at the time, GE was putting out a video and told us all, don't destroy the river to clean up. And people were buying into that as if it was a bad thing that we were cleaning the PCBs out of this section of the river. And they were using it in this video that was very powerful. And like I say, a lot of people bought into it. And now the data is showing that the work that EPA has done in there, and GE, has paid off. I'm still not liking those low numbers because they're in the environment, but compared to what was there 15 years ago, it's definitely a vast improvement.
Indeed.
And, high 90s like we're seeing there is impressive.
Yep.
And we hope that the next round in the river will meet similar goals as you try to tackle a much more comprehensive, I don't know if that's the right word, but much more complex river system below the confluence. Anyway, I think you've done a good job, and I think you proved that you can clean the river without destroying it, because if you look at those pictures too, if you follow the pictures that have been taken at the 5 and the 10-year points, the river's looking good. And anybody that wants to really see where they dredged, if you go up to the bar, what's at the East Side Cafe, and you look over the river, now it's more than 10 years now. What is it?
It's probably about 15, 16
years. If you go over there next summer in July, and you look down this river, and you cannot tell that it was dredged. You cannot tell that the tree population is amazing. The shrubs that have grown in there that GE had to plant have reproduced massively, and the banks are thick. And the new riprap and things like this are just giving the whole river a new look there, and it's really exciting to see it can be done. So we should be positive about the next leg of the cleanup that maybe we can achieve. No, I think we can achieve a lot better than we have right now, that's for sure, which is still a very contaminated river.
Benno, Reed, and Lauren.
Okay, I guess it's two questions. So, based on what you just described about your release of GE from any further sampling, can you say that that kind of unilateral decision, or was it a unilateral decision, that can be made around any of the sampling requirements by EPA, irregardless of the fact that they may be in print in the consent decree, number one. And number two, I agree with whoever it was that was heading toward making the point that we have 3 data points 5 years apart that demonstrate the health of the river 15 years after remedial activity. Wouldn't it make sense, instead of abandoning completely testing protocol, to stretch it out and say, okay, instead of every 5 years, we'll go every 10 years for 30 years? And to see if those additional 3 sets of sampling confirm what might be considered the beginnings of a small but important trend, or whether additional scouring and by the elements and by the rains may in fact produce different results.
Can you speak to authority and?
Yeah, the authority, EPA has the authority to approve the documents after opportunity to review by the states. There's nothing in the consent decree that requires this sampling. This was as part of a O&M plan, an operation and maintenance plan that EPA came up with, and when EPA came up with it in 2007, it was clear. It said you will do 3 rounds of sampling, and you will, at the end of the 3 rounds, you will propose for EPA approval an alternate frequency, and you have the option to propose discontinue. So there's nothing in here that violates the consent decree. And yes, EPA does have the discretion under the consent decree to make decisions. With regard to can we do that with the permit, all submittals in the permit are subject to EPA review and approval, like we talked about. What's in the permit is what's in there. There is no monitoring frequency in the permit. That all comes in plans to be submitted pursuant to the permit.
So in terms of the duration, so rather than going from 5 to none.
We could have done that. At this point, I thought it was reasonable to discontinue and with the macros, and we'll continue with the sediments. If the sediment sampling shows something that may indicate there's a problem, we always reserve the right to have GE go back and do other sampling.
I've got Reed, Lauren, Judy, and Tim.
When you say other sampling, you mean reopening of the macro sampling?
I don't want to use the word reopener because it has a certain context, but yes.
Okay. Just as an excited new member of this committee, I wanted to say thank you very much for the work you're doing in the presentation, and say that I would like to go on record saying that I think it was a bad idea to let GE off that the sampling of the macro. I think every 10 years, I mean, we're in it for the long haul. I got kids, and maybe they'll have kids, who knows, but you know, we're talking hundreds of years, right?
Understood.
Lauren.
I guess that I'm disappointed that we aren't going to be, I agree with Jane. I think this is a good indicator of the health of the river, and I think that keeping the biota going would have been a better idea. I guess the question is, if we have plans being developed now, going from here forward, do we make sure that we try to have sampling in these new plans that we're all reviewing now? Try to make sure that the sampling goes out several years, maybe decades, and maybe in perpetuity until the GE is released from the permit because they're making the standards. If they're not making the standards, I would like to propose that sampling continues until the standards are met or they're released. That's just us on record. I guess my question would be, if we had a huge storm event and some of the riprap or some of the remediation was damaged, and we go back and we sample and we see higher levels again, would EPA find that reasonable to go back and do another round of sampling to show a trend? So if we have a 200, 500-year storm and there were damage to GE's riprap and whatever the remediation is there a chance to go back and say we better sample again just to make sure that PCBs weren't dislodged during the storm?
Yes, there's always options to require GE to do more.
Would we, as the CCC, probably should be requesting this kind of a thing if there were a storm? Should we be kind of keeping an eye out and helping you more strongly require GE to come back after a storm event? I'm not, a big storm event.
I mean, you do what you think's right. We do have a requirement, if there's a big storm, we would look at it and determine what would need to be done, if anything.
Got 3 more placards up. Let's take those and then we'll cover the Silver Lake piece and take questions on that. So I've got Judy, Tim, and I.
So these are printouts. Again, I present this every meeting now. These are printouts from January to current date of all of the documents that have been added to the repository, and from GE, from EPA, back and forth, other entities. The count to date is 172 documents. There used to be a process at this site and at this CCC that many of these documents, it was the essence of the CCC, that the documents going in the repository would be discussed, some briefly, some in depth, some with slides, some with a heads up, and that doesn't happen anymore. It's all autonomous on EPA, what is chosen to be presented, and I can't keep up with all of these documents any longer. When I could keep up, it was a daunting task. So, and there was a better give and take coming from EPA, and EPA would have the sensibility, and I mean that in a good way, to know that many of the stakeholders sitting at this table would not have been pleased to find out that this macroinvertebrate testing was about to be stopped, and it would have been held off until such time that the CCC could have been notified and at least expressed our dissatisfaction or our concerns with that. None of that happens anymore. I get to read maybe a quarter of these documents now. And EPA, that's why the CCC is here, for the EPA to come and help us understand the documents, discern what's fluff and what has great meaning to us, and to help with some of the esoteric science. And I will continue to come with the printouts of the monthly documents that go into the repository, because there are certain things with the CCC that we're not meeting our mission, the point of being here. I did get to read one document, and that was on a sinkhole. And I was wondering if Dean could very briefly talk about the sinkhole at the Elm Street Bridge and what's going on with that as it relates to the sheet piling.
Sure, I can do that. I'd like to finish the questions on the presentation first, and then before I go to the next presentation, I'll talk about the sinkhole.
Okay, so Tim's next, then Audrey, then we'll go to the sinkhole. So Tim.
It was a while ago I had that question, but I say, thank you, Judy.
Audrey.
I just want to say for the record, it's pretty amazing to come here and ask us to comment on a decision that you've already made without having the opportunity as a as a community to comment on it prior to it being made. It's kind of asked backwards, it seems.
Do you want to speak about the sinkhole that you showed?
The retaining wall, there was a very situation immediately downstream of Elm Street. When we did the 1.5 mile remediation, there was a timber wall, 50, probably 75-year-old timber retaining wall, timber log retaining wall, holding back where it used to be the white barber shop or the white.
The barber shop was right there,
barber
okay.
That was replaced. Not something we wanted to do, but we didn't want to in any way be responsible by doing the remediation to affect the retaining wall. So a new retaining wall was constructed out of concrete panels and some sheet pile. There has been some subsidence or a sinkhole behind that retaining wall where somehow the material is coming out near the bottom of the retaining wall from the surface. So GE is required to repair it.
Is there parking
There is parking. It's
on
in
the
the
top
park.
of that?
Yes, it's in the parking lot where you can see the subsidence or.
You have all those Legos underneath the bottom of the river right there. Are they impacted?
They are not impacted. It's above it. It's between the parking lot and say the river elevation. That's what's somehow finding a pathway, and in a heavy rain, some material leaves, and then eventually you get a void and it collapses.
A lot of pressure right there.
A lot of pressure on that spot. It's a very tricky spot.
Was there any testing of that bank? But was there any need to test that bank? It was pretty well covered.
No, that was all, like I said, it was a timber wall.
Okay. So you're not concerned about this? They're going to put in more new sheet piling or weld in a piece of sheet piling, they said?
Correct. We're going to try and weld in a piece and to eliminate the void where the material was escaping, and then inspect it at least twice a year.
Thank you.
I hope for a long time.
Yeah, believe me, the owner will let me know.
This was an area that I believe you guys were very concerned about, because there were buildings and houses along that stretch of river, that when you got in there and actually started scooping the PCBs out, that was going to cave in.
Right.
I think I remember the pylons being put there for that reason.
Yeah, it was one of the more challenging spots.
Let's hear about Silver Lake.
Silver Lake. This was requested by the CCC, so it was not anything we proposed. I think Jane asked us to talk about it. So talking about the Silver Lake surface water sampling, and I was just thinking of it now, I assumed you meant the effluent. That's the sampling we do, what leaves the lake through the culvert into the river. It discharges from the lake to the river. That's what I'm presenting tonight. That's where we're doing our surface water sampling. Not what's going into the lake.
Any chance to make that just a little bit bigger?
We can try a little bit, but...
Dean, we're getting older here, come on, we're getting bigger.
Yeah, it's hard to be bigger and... What did we do?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's about as best I can do, and then I can slide it. So, we'll go back and see if I can work this funky thing. So in 2007, the Silver Lake remediation, I'll kind of start in the middle, a little odd, but so the remediation was between like 2012 to 14 roughly. Prior to that, in this area, GE did a fair amount of sampling of the of the water leaving the lake to the river. So everything to the left of this gray bar is pre-remediation sampling. Everything to the right is post-remediation. The units in concentration are up here, and the year is over here. I would focus more on how much it changed as opposed to the actual raw number. I mean, you're certainly welcome to look at what you want, but to me, this is much lower than it was over here. And there's a bar chart that'll also show that. A couple of things I want to point out on this. One, if you kind of look closely, if you connected the dots, usually these lines here would be January, so the winter months, around the line, and in the middle would be summer. There appears to be like triangles. In the summer, your results are higher. In the winter, it goes back down when it gets colder. Not a perfect match, but not too bad. It goes up and down and up and down. So that's just one observation. I don't, certainly not going to propose an answer. There's some theories, but that's, you do see a seasonal variation.
David Carpenter said that that's very, that has great meaning, and especially for remediation actions, that if whenever possible, they should always take place in the winter, because the volatilization that's occurring in the summer months, it calms during the winter months.
It's also known that graph says to me, if you study limnology a little bit about ponds and lakes, that they do this thing called inversion, where the bottom of the lake comes up in the summertime because it's being stirred up.
Let's go, I think Dean's got you guys.
Yeah, I have five. Two other things to point out here. On the right-hand side, there's both the blue, and I'll try and blow this up since you've got the overall scale. I'm not sure I can do this, but wow. The blue samples are GE's lab. We did split samples, those are the orange. And this points out one of the challenges. Using the aerochlor method, this is the aerochlor method, which, without getting into it too much, is really designed to measure pure aerochlors that don't degrade or differentially disassociate. So in a pure, perfect pattern, it's pretty easy to do the analysis. Right now, the concentration of PCBs in the surface water is right at what's called the detection level, or very low to the limits of the instrument. GE's lab, I'll use the word, was quantifying aerochlors that are limited not. It's very close. I've talked to like a bunch of chemists. It's like a judgment call. They quantified them, ours didn't, so ours were mostly non-detects and GE's were detects. And again, you can see the seasonal thing. It's not that one is right or one is wrong. It's up to the chemist. I mean, you're right at the edge of the instrument.
Would there be any value in doing testing for dioxin or dioxin-like chemicals?
I think there'd be a value, which is what we did with through the congener analysis, to see get a little bit better handle of what's going on. So I'll show you those slides in a little bit. I'm not sure that dioxin would lead to answers. So when we looked at this and GE looked at it, it's like, well, you know, are there PCBs in there or not? And it sounds like a simple question, but the way PCBs work with 209 individual congeners, they get hard to measure at the detection limit, especially in surface water. Like, I think like Benno said and Tim said, the different molecules will dissolve into the water at different rates. So your whole aerochlor 1254 doesn't dissolve in total. So it gets hard to measure, especially at very, very low levels. And by meaning low, I mean close to the detection level.
But let's actually go through the slides and come back for questions.
So that's just kind of a key thing. And the rest will pretty much flow on that. So this is pretty simple. This is a bar chart that summarizes it by year. You can see there appears to be a trend down even prior to remediation, and here's the data post-remediation. So just from a visual view, it's lower.
How do you attribute the natural reduction?
I don't have much, and I knew I was going to get asked that. The only actions that I can remember happening around 2007, and I'm not saying it resulted in lower things, but the only real actions that were going on was PETA did do some site prep, dug up a lot of pavement, and put a lot of pervious, you know, a lot of grass. So there might have been less actual volume of water discharged from PETA property to the lake. I can't draw the conclusion that that's why it went down.
Makes sense.
That's the only action that I know of that would have impacted something going into the lake.
What year did they put the stormwater?
That's what I was going to check. I'm thinking it was around 2007, 2008. It could, I'm not saying it did. That's the only thing, I mean, all the other remediation, nothing drains to Silver Lake. It goes the other way.
Let's go ahead and go to the slides and come back to Tim's. Let me, is that already just finish the slides and we'll come back? Is that okay?
Oh, okay.
Sure. Okay, just make sure.
So what we did to try and figure out if there really was non-detect or if there were some types of PCBs in there, EPA did congener analysis, splits, same time. Those are the dark blue ones. We did those quarterly. They actually track a little bit better towards GE's data. When we actually look at the individual congeners, they're the lighter ones. The ones, without getting into it too much, there's possibility of up to 10 chlorines being on a PCB molecule. What's called the monochlorinated and dichlorinated, only one chlorine or two chlorines is the predominant congener you're seeing. So
Say that last little bit again?
the predominant it's called a homolog, but the predominant molecules you're seeing in the congener analysis have either one or two chlorines. Whereas most of your heavier air chlors would have 3, 4, or 5. They're a mix, but what you're seeing, what the congeners appear to show is that the lighter or more soluble individual molecules are in the surface water. So I'll leave it at that without
Let's go ahead and get through the rest.
figure out why. But again, you can see, and again, even with this GE data post, you'll see the seasonal effect. The only other thing I'll point out is that GE's lab, it's called Pace Labs. They have stopped doing business. They stopped doing this method. They got a really low detection level, but it was a really lab specific one. They are no longer doing it, so GE has also switched labs. And going forward, the data may be more, airflow data may be more similar to EPA's. Just two more slides. This just shows GE's air chlor data with EPA's data, which is orange, which is mostly non-detect, and the congener data. So you can see the congeners do show some PCB, I'll call them molecules. There are some PCBs in there. They are in the surface water. And to me, it just shows that it's real difficult to do air chlors with any meaning when you're at or near that detection level. So that's it, and I got just one more slide. It looks like there's reduction. Here again, I didn't run statistics in the air chlor concentrations pre to post. We don't have congener data pre to post, so I can't speculate, and I won't speculate. I can just see what's on the graph. As I mentioned several times, difficulty with the air chlor method, the seasonal effect, and then going forward, we're going to continue with the quarterly sampling. GE will do their air chlors with their lab. EPA's lab will do air chlors and congeners. So we get 3 results for each sample. That's it.
Is there any extrapolation to what is going into the river on a yearly basis?
In math?
In pounds or?
I did not do the math. GE did collect flow data when they did the sampling, so you can multiply it and get a mass loading. I mean, you can only do it on the days you sample, and you could get an average loading for when you sample. I did not do that though, but it could be done.
This was at the outfall?
This was at the outfall from Silver Lake to the river. On the Silver Lake side of the outfall. Right when it goes into the pipe that goes under East Street.
Do you know if PETA is actually sampling under under GE's old NIPD's permit?
I believe they are sampling. If it flows, they sample. There are some months when if it's dry, there is no flow out of that culvert. But yes, I believe they are. I don't check it regularly, but.
And that's into Silver Lake, right, Jane?
That's flowing into Silver Lake. Yeah. I believe they're still, I know the permit's still enforceable, so I assume they're complying with the sampling.
And do you have any data on Uncommit Brook as well?
I know you asked that. We do not have post-remediation, surface water monitoring, exiting Unconventional. We don't have that.
Do we have it for next meeting?
There's none taken, or there is no data to present.
What are you gathering post-remediation of Uncle Brook in terms of data?
Nothing for surface water.
But you are, anything other kind of data you are collecting now?
Doesn't that make it all the more important to keep up with the macroinvertebrate sampling?
I think we would see it in the sediment first, or as well. You make a good point, is just one of the many decisions we make.
Again, many folks have voted they're not happy with that decision, just to make the point. A few more questions, and I'm aware of time. We'll do just the last few items here today. Barbara.
Could you clarify, I'm confused now, the difference between air chlor and congener? Air chlor is the mixtures?
I can try. PCBs are a mixture, there's 209 individual PCB molecules.
Which are called congeners.
Which are called
right?
congeners.
Okay, that's what I thought.
If you have a really good lab, you can measure all those individually. A couple you can't, but in essence, you can measure each congener. You get a big sheet with 209 answers, and you add them all up. Aerochlors are a certain mixture of PCBs. When it was manufactured, for example, 1260. It has a meaning, I think 60 means 60% by weight chlorine. That will have a certain mixture of congeners. It'll be different than if you had 1254. But if you took a pure oil sample of 1260, it'll give you a real distinct pattern.
So the reason I'm confused is the blue line was so much higher. So is that because they're basically stacking up the individual congeners?
You're adding up all your congeners, yeah. You're more sensitive, your detection level's lower, you can measure more. The challenge with aerochlors is it's all based on seeing the pattern, the original pattern. And as PCBs degrade or as they differentially volatilize, your normal, if you can picture your normal pyramid, it's usually 5 peaks per aerochlor. They don't match, so the chemist has to make a judgment whether he thinks it's an aerochlor or not. The chemist was quantifying what's called aerochlor 1221, which is a lighter aerochlor, but we all know they didn't use that. They used 1254, which was heavier. So it was kind of showing you that you're getting some type of PCB with less chlorine. But it makes it really hard to quantify when you're you're seeing little bump, it makes it really hard to quantify. And when you start adding up 4 or 5 aerochlors at very low levels, that's why GE's levels you can see are so much higher than ours. But we've had chemists look at both and they say, well, nobody's right or wrong. It's just the nature of where you are when you're at very low levels of surface water.
Sage.
Or water, excuse me.
What company made the aerochlors?
The company that I believe that GE purchased it from, I believe, was Monsanto.
Okay, thank you. I also want to ask, the unit on this graph is parts micrograms per liter, which is parts per trillion approximately, isn't it?
Parts per billion.
Per billion, right, okay.
But they're all less than 1, so yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Tim.
Somebody had mentioned our concerns through the years about dioxins. At the site, dioxins are a byproduct of making PCBs, and still a concern. Puff the Magic Dragon, the old incinerator, used to puff for years and years in the Lakewood neighborhood, and we know when you're burning PCBs, dioxins are created. The other thing is that when you start testing in congener-specific methods too, it's well known that there are, I forget how many right now, there's 3 or 4 of the PCBs are called dioxin-like PCBs, and they're much more toxic to wildlife and humans. So when they look at these, if you have a very sensitive gas chromatograph, you can actually see the breakdown of the 209 congeners and actually figure how many of those congeners are dioxin-like. And that's how they determine how poisonous they are.
Any other follow-up questions? Maybe we just have some quick other process updates before we finish.
I have a couple of questions. Do you know anything, Dean, about the Housatonic Bridge in Housatonic? So they went through the first phase of repairs and now they've found out that much more work is needed. Does anybody know about that?
I don't.
Anybody?
I know about it, I live right down the street.
All right, there's talk about coming back to do much more extensive work. So that means more PCBs resuspended down to your front yard. We'll look into that. Are we gonna get a report on any of the NRD projects, like the Telelectric Dam?
It's not on the agenda today. No.
Can't be for the next time if that's of interest.
Well, we have an NRD trustee here.
Judy, specific questions on the Telelectric Dam?
Can we get an update on where everything stands?
You know, we were out there in July doing some scoping on the borings. If you recall, I was here back in November telling you that we would need to ensure that the bridge was stable enough for us to do any kind of excavation dam removal. So that exploratory process, consultants have been retained. We scoped where we're going to put them, and then we were delayed by the railroad in getting the appropriate approvals and training, and also just extending the permits. But we were out there in December doing a little bit of exploratory work, but there's really been not a lot of movement on that project, unfortunately.
So this continues to be the wooden pilings that are holding up the railroad bridge.
Potentially.
That has the most concern for structural integrity.
Correct.
Once the dam is removed, and that could, okay.
All
And-
bets would be off if they were there.
Say again?
All bets would be off if they were there. If we did find that they were wooded, that would be a problem.
So you haven't even gotten to the point of uncovering them yet?
Right.
Okay. My last question is about the Lee development in downtown Lee, near the Columbia Mill Dam. Just wondered if there's going to be, what that's about, and if there's any EPA involvement with that project, or any concerns?
There was EPA involvement from the brownfield side, providing support, I believe, for assessment. That's part of a brownfields grant that goes through Berkshire Regional Planning Commission with regard to the sediment. It looks like a land-based operation to me, so I have not, the consent decree team has not weighed in on that.
Or do you have any?
But what you first said was that that EPA was involved from the
EPA
brownfield?
provides, through its brownfield or redevelopment program, whatever you want to call it, some funding to the Lee mills.
But not so much because of this cleanup site?
No, just because it's a
Old mill.
old mill.
Thank you. That's it.
All right. A quick update. So as you all know, we're reaching out to many of you for interviews for just kind of a process review of this group. And we've got about a third of the way through the interviews. They've been, the questions that you all helped us with, Dennis and Judy, are really good ones, and we're getting really great feedback on lots of interesting ideas for improvements and changes. So we're going to do all those or many interviews in the next several weeks. We'll assemble kind of the results and ideas and options in a PowerPoint, which we'll bring to you all. We need to talk about when, but the thought is in April, but it will be probably in Connecticut, so we talk about whether that's appropriate. And bring that to you with kind of what we've heard from you all summarized without attribution. And then this group can talk about some potential changes or improvements, consult with EPA, and then we make some of those changes after the conversation among this group. So that's the general approach. That does lead us to the thought is we have a meeting in late April. We've typically had it in Connecticut in late April. I don't know if people still think that makes sense or we should do it differently. I thought we'd be sometime the last week in April, probably that Wednesday. We'll look for availability of the same space, which worked pretty well last year.
Was that the high school?
That was in Kent. It was at Kent Town Hall.
I don't know what everybody thinks. The high school worked really well. Dean liked it.
We can do that too.
And we
Closer for Massachusetts.
With the high school, it's the
Housatonic Valley Regional High School.
We can look into that. No problem.
It was.
Yeah, that room was good.
Okay. Why don't we look into that space? It'll be that last Wednesday of April, which is
Auditorium.
vacation week, so it's like the 25th or something like that off the
It's not the main auditorium, it's a separate lecture room.
Okay, so we are tables and we don't have to be in auditorium seating and all that, right?
Yeah, we
So
don't.
it'll, right, comfortable, okay. All right, we'll check into that, okay. And then the thought would be July, we would potentially have, again, a tour, more site-based, and then again, a meeting in the fall, probably October, June, is that right? We are, there. One of the, we'll see what else people say, but in the interviews, a lot of people are talking about the notion for the broader public to be involved. What's the role of community outreach more broadly than this group? Does it make sense once a year for the CCC to sponsor a broader kind of public workshop and engagement about what's happening? So those are some of the ideas we'll bring back to you that people are suggesting to us that may be worth noting even for this year. Tim?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we meet, at which time the EAB might produce a ruling in the courts, because that's, everybody at this table and organizations, we're all involved in this and biting our nails and wondering what's going to happen and trying to figure out when it's going to happen. And when it comes out is the time that we're going to want to be talking about it, I think. And I think that's important because we probably, if there's any sort of comment process or whatever, we need to be informed and we need to be on top of it and kind of figure out what, because the process is that if the EAB rules in a certain way, all the parties have a chance to appeal. And depending upon who appeals, and we sort of expect, we've always expected General Electric to appeal, and that provides the pathway, which is still very muddy to us, of heading towards federal court. It's very muddy and murky there. It's a very gray area, and a lot of us have talked about it at this table, and we don't quite know exactly where this land is. So I think that's important. We meet when this decision.
You're willing, if the EAB issues a ruling, we'll try to convene.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll try and think of the timing. 2 weeks out, but yeah, we won't wait till October.
Yeah.
How's that?
I think it's important.
So again, that's our plan is April, Connecticut, July, some kind of tour, October, and if the EAB rules, we'll try to get a meeting quickly, whenever that may be, or shortly thereafter.
Susan didn't have a chance to say anything for Connecticut DEP.
I usually just listen in this meeting, but if there's something you'd like me to comment on, we're reviewing the documents that are coming out, both for the institutional controls, the monitoring and so forth. As Dean mentioned, that comment period goes to the end of the month, so we're planning to submit extensive comments on that. And then of course, we'll be reviewing the other documents like the for Woods Pond Dam, et cetera. We'll be reviewing those as well. So I noticed in the monthly meeting notes, the monthly reports from GE that they have apparently done another round of sampling for Connecticut for fish and insects voluntarily. We're still awaiting those results. I noticed that the deadline keeps moving, so I'm assuming it's taking a while to process. I haven't been in touch with Kevin Mooney to ask, but if I don't hear from him in another month or two, I may contact him directly. I assume he's pretty busy. That's all I can think of at the moment, unless you have specific questions for me.
No, when you were out of the room, I asked about the Housatonic, the hamlet of Housatonic, the Housatonic Bridge, and no one seemed to know anything about a second round of somewhat emergent repairs that I was told about.
Are you talking about in Falls Village? Or?
No, I'm talking about the hamlet of Housatonic in Great Barrington.
Oh, okay.
The big bridge that goes right over into Housatonic. They did some repairs, and now more structural issues were found, and they were supposed to be coming back to do more, so maybe that will happen.
We have Jane and then Audrey, so we need to wrap up.
Am I the only one who thinks there's a heck of a lot of stuff happening and documents coming out, and that meeting, 3 times this year is really insufficient, even with adding the EAB? I feel like, as Judy said, there's so many documents, it's impossible for me to keep up. I think we're failing to meet frequently enough to satisfy real citizen involvement.
come back, that's somebody got his comment. Audrey.
Prior to the EAB hearing last June, about the week prior to that, we were informed that there were settlement discussions going on between GE and EPA. Are those settlement discussions continuing behind the scenes?
I don't believe they were ever settlement discussions. I think what Tim sent out was, it all spoke for itself, that I think it was a consideration to delay the EAB hearing
But the
to
purpose
allow
of
for
the...
some discussion.
Yeah.
That did not happen.
And are there any ongoing settlement discussions?
Not that I'm aware of.
During the EAB's waiting period, shall we call it?
Not that
you're aware of.
I'm aware of.
All right. To Jane's question, so Jane's raised a question about frequency of meetings. It's actually one of the questions we're asking in the review, but that we won't have the answers for everybody yet. So you're concerned about it not being frequently enough. So if other people want to comment on that at this point.
I already have many times, meeting after meeting after meeting.
One option is we will have the results from everybody back and can share with you what we heard, and we can have that, I think we need to have that explicit discussion when we can report back the results. That won't be until the next meeting. In 2 or 3 months.
That's part of the problem.
Right. Exactly. So I don't, if you have any thoughts on that for now, or we kind of state this for the moment, we have to revisit that question.
What about getting GE back into the room?
We did request an interview of GE about the CCC, and they declined to be here.
They're no show. For years now.
And that's just for our review process. So I'm not speaking to the broader statement about the CCC, but they declined to be interviewed about the CCC.
Dean, who's still over there? Is
Rod McLaren
Rod?
is still there. Kevin Mooney is there. Andy Silver has an office both in Pittsfield and in Schenectady.
So Rod, Andy has an office,
And Kevin.
and Kevin.
And they have another employee his name is Matt Calicone. He is doing most of the groundwater and facility stuff.
Who's doing residential?
There is no residential program to do.
Work that's been
I
happening.
don't know what you mean.
But there's residential work that happened.
Oh, that's under the consent decree. That's Kevin.
Okay.
Reed.
I just have a quick question, which is, you brought up the question of this bridge, and it makes me think, what are the guidelines for doing that level of construction and the effects of PCBs not only on the work crew, but on the individuals who are working in that immediate area? That's air quality, water quality, et cetera, ad nauseum.
Under the consent, under the permit, which is not in effect, we don't have any authority to have GE to do anything. To do a project.
The fact that it's been disputed.
Right. When somebody does a project in the waterway, my belief is they will have to comply with regulations and get permits to do that work. So it's up to the permitting authority to address that.
And is there any way that the EPA, that we could, as citizens, request the air being monitored, or?
I think you'd have to request it from the people giving the permit, which is certainly not me.
Right. Who is that?
It's not my strong suit, I don't know who it is.
And where can I find that on the website?
These are
on the website.
Gotcha.
So probably DOT doing the work in Mass would be my guess.
DOT, right? And and do you guys have somebody that works with the DOT that I could?
I don't.
You don't know.
Sorry.
So the Mass DOT, when they do work on any work on the roads, bridges, et cetera, over Housatonic, they don't have any obligation to come to you for review of their proposal.
Well, right now, there's nothing in effect in the permit.
And the last time you were here, you asked for an air monitor for Rising Pond, and I don't know if it was Tim Conway who was here that you spoke with, but they seemed to indicate that they would speak with you or get back to you. Do you have an air monitor?
I have no air monitor at Rising Pond, and I'd love one.
If you want to follow up with that, maybe the best thing to do is shoot either Dean an email directly or shoot us to us, and we'll connect you for people within the changing of the phone.
I think it was at the last meeting, there was a vernal pool in Lenox that was being designed for remediation. Can you give any update on that?
Yeah, that is part of what's called the residential properties downstream of the complex, sorry for the long name. The property owner is in discussions with EPA has expressed a preference not to have any remediation done.
So you couldn't get to the vernal pool itself because of property access issues?
We could issue an order, we prefer not to. The owners are exploring an option to commit to not converting, because this is resident, this is not an ecological issue, it's separate. There's two separate issues. The main purpose of this program was to clean up the residential that could be converted to a lawn. One option is for the owners to agree not to convert it to a lawn, and then the vernal pool would go into the rest of the river program.
It would.
Yeah, it wouldn't be eliminated, it would be evaluated further in the rest of the program. So as of now, there is no current, although GE drew up the plans to do it, should the owner agree. Right now, there is no schedule to do that remediation.
We are kind of at the end of time, but we did want to, if there's any brief public comment, we want to make sure we do provide time for that towards the end. So,
Hi, Charlie.
anybody want to make a brief public comment before we close tonight? Or anybody else at the table?
Can I just ask, this meeting moved till 6, is that something that's going to continue, or will you be going back?
It's really up to you all. So I think, do you guys prefer this, just a quick show of hands, who prefers the 5:30 time?
If it's in Connecticut, I prefer 6.
Kind of one half of. Looks like we don't have a consensus on timing. We've typically done 5:30, so we'll probably revert to that because that's been standard practice since we don't have consensus of the group. We can discuss that again in our process review when we meet again.
If you have more meetings, you don't need to have long meetings. So, because right now you're up against a time limit, so if things were, for some reason, more discussion was needed tonight, you don't have it. But if you have a meeting every 2 months instead of 3 times a year, then you can do it from 6 to 8.
Any other public comment? I'll come back to the table if there's any other. Yes, sir.
On the topic of biota sampling, what I hear is the numbers and the graphs charting how much PCBs is not in the biota or how much is in it and all that and how much it fluctuates. But I don't think that the biota numbers is the only thing of concern. To me, it's about memory. I think by constantly monitoring the biota that's in the river and around the river, it reminds people that we have something in the river that doesn't belong there. I think having it stretched out to 10-year sampling sort of washes away the fact that we have an issue.
Any other quick public comments? Yes, sir.
I just want to second, I know you guys are looking at, some sort of community engagement. I think that would be, I'd be very supportive of that. I think that there are a lot of people in the community that want to hear more, that want to know what's going on. So I think that would definitely be a positive initiative for this community.
Tom, did you have a final?
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that we have the open house on March 29th, which is a Thursday at the Lenox Town Hall. And we'll be going through all of our round 1, 2, and 3 projects. The project sponsors will be there actually presenting those. So Judy actually reminds me that Tel Electric and Alex Ackman will be there with that project, talking about that. And I know as well that Karen has moved on. Karen Pelto, she's no longer the lead trustee from Massachusetts. That would be myself. And my alternate would be David Cameron from the Western Region Office of Mass DEP. He's the wetlands chief over there.
So what's the time on that? You said it's on the 29th, but what time?
Around this time, we haven't said
Oh, in the evening. But it would be.
I'm listening to what you're saying and wondering what would be a good time, but yeah.
I just want to remark on the acoustics again in this room. It was amazing because I can hear you perfectly standing right there. Dean.
I just have one quick thing without getting into a PCB classroom class, but Barbara, you saw me looking. This is what's called, I think this is a gas chromatograph, and it's not the best picture, but it was the only one I could find. So you can see there's various different mixtures of the air cores, and if you had a pure sample like this 1260, you would see this. What you get now when you analyze it, instead of seeing, there's usually 5 peaks that a chemist will look at, you might see 2. So then the chemist has to guess, is it really there or is it really not? Then you see some peaks like down here, which normally you wouldn't look at because you wouldn't need to. Well, you can see, it's not the best graph, but you can see they kind of overlap with 1242. So if it's flat up here and they see these 2 bumps, they may say, oh, there's X amount of 1242, X amount of 1248, X amount of this. One chemist will say, no, you need all 5, you need more. So it really only works best when you have something that more approximates the original mixture. So all the testing was set up to measure the mixture, not how it degrades.
Why do you have 2 1242s in there?
I just Googled this. I didn't come up with anything. I don't know why they're different. But yeah, that's a good point. I don't know.
Is that, and that's natural degradation that we're looking at?
I don't know what this is looking at. Like I said, I just tried to find something with a PCB pattern.
So that's just showing the pattern. It's not
the bottom one, I don't know what the bottom one is. The bottom one looks off.
I just wondered because there was so much tonnage of burned PCBs that came back in the transformers that had failed, that turned into dioxin or dioxin-like molecules that, you know, where are you looking and you're no longer dealing with an aerochlor, you're dealing with a dioxin or a dioxin-like degraded PCB molecule.
Right.
Generally, too, if you're trying to do very sensitive testing, there are very good chromatographs that spit out all 209 congeners when you run it through the machine. And then what happens is the machine will actually add up, the computer will add up the congeners so that you actually get sort of a more accurate reading of what's in there, including, congeners that are down, 1206 and things like that. I mean, it goes that whole range through 209 molecules so that it can get very specific and very accurate. And when they're studying wildlife, scientists, they're generally looking for that kind of accuracy so they can...
So there's a definite difference with the 2 methods. And even within the methods, each lab will do things a little...
So I'm worried of time, so let's try to wrap up officially and do we run informal.
I just have a quick question for Tom for this gathering, whenever it's going to be for the NRD projects. What are you thinking about as a kind of framework for this? Is this going to be informative about are you handing out awards? Is this a festive event or is this an informational event?
It will be both. In the beginning, kind of informal, there'll be food and snacks, and post awards, and the project sponsors will be presenting projects that they were involved in and where that got done. And then we'll be doing a presentation on the ground for proposal and
So you've already contacted the NRD recipients about this?
Yeah. And by the way, I'll be sending out a follow-up email to the
Everything that you've sent out to the NRD recipients, in my opinion, should be copied to the repository.
Okay.
All right. I'm noting Jane's concern about frequency of meetings and Judy's. I'm not sure what we'll call that tonight, but it's still on the table, so I want to note that. Note the concern about ceasing the maximum perturbative sampling. We will get with you all organized to kind of figure out the details of the Connecticut meeting. We'll look at the location of the high school that was mentioned. And I think with that, we will close for tonight. Thank you all, everybody, and safe travels and stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.